Alright, hey guys, this is Mind to Metal here, and I'm gonna be just doing my first video making this. It's the rock Among Us, just something I found in my room, easy to cast. I don't claim this to be my own intellectual property. I did splice together two 3D print files on Thingiverse to create that, and I was inspired by another model of it that required money to actually download. So to cast, I'm going to be using Petrobond in these flasks that I already made. I'm going to use clamps to hold it down so that way it doesn't go anywhere as I pack it. Just clamping it down to the table. Petrobond is this oil bonded green sand, which is a mixture between clay and play sand, and it allows it to hold its shape as you pack it and then remove the item that you're attempting to cast. Right here I'm taking the flask. I know it's called a cope and drag, I forget which is which, but terms don't really matter as long as you can do the process. Let me get my gloves real quick. I'm wearing this ridiculous thing over my hair as a safety precaution. It also keeps my hair out of my face because we're in a very humid climate. We like a little bit of water in our air, and this just helps me cool off and keeps my hair out of the way so that way it doesn't affect anything. But I'm just gonna load some Petrobond into this this flour sifter. Just going to do this. Since it's a full model, I'm just kind of going to fill this entire flask and then push it down at the end whenever I flip it over. So this is kind of just making it so that way I get detail whenever I do press it in. And then just pour the rest in. Doesn't have to be anything too overly complicated. When I tell people that metal casting is mainly 80% just playing with sand, they laugh and think I'm joking, but it really is. Lighting the forge is the easy part. That's the just sit back and watch it happen, because it's not like you can stick your hand in the forge and really do much like that, unless if you're melting cans and you just drop them in there. I'm not lighting the forge yet, because I want to make sure that the pattern comes out alright before I start using propane, because there have been multiple times where I don't get the pattern right, and then the forge is already going, and I have to ditch the whole attempt, and I just wasted propane. I'm using this metal rammer that I made to pack the sand down so that way it's nice and firm. I'll make a video in the future on how to make one of these. If you go check out Paul's garage, this is actually where I got the model from and the inspiration. But you just want to pack it in there. If you're using homemade green sand with the kitty powder, the pulverized kitty litter, and the dry sand, I have a batch of that over there. You definitely want to do the pinch test or the grip test to make sure that it's going to be able to hold the pattern well. But since this is Petrobond and I bought this online and I know this works, I'm not worried about that. I'm just gonna pack it and let it do its thing. Alright. I would be using that side of the table, but I've got pallets for another project. Gonna use this ruler to cut all this up. Put that back in the bucket. And I'm gonna flip this over. Alright. Alright, so there was a little bit of a technical difficulty and some lost footage. Basically what I did was I flipped it over, I put baby powder on there. It's a it's basically a parting powder which keeps the model from sticking to the sand and also keeps the sand from sticking to the other half of the sand that we're gonna put on there. So I basically coated it in baby powder and buried it. And basically I pressed it into the sand, and just to check that it isn't easy removal, I'm gonna pull it out now and then put it back in, so that way in the end it's not gonna be too difficult. And as you can see, we've got a basic imprint there. So I'm gonna put them back in. Some fell in. I'm going to put the model back in, then squeeze the sand around them just so that way it's going to keep some detail and be packed around him and he's nice and good. I'm going to recoat him with baby powder. And then put the other half of the flask on. I'm going to clamp this down to the table. Clamping it down so that way as I pack, it's not just going to push the whole thing up. Alright, then I'm going to sift some onto the model. It's going to keep some detail and also make it an easier removal process when the time comes. So just going to sift over that. Get a decent bit. You don't have to fill up the whole thing. Just enough to press onto the model. Like that. So just going to do that. I'm not overly worried about it. It's not a very complicated model. If it was, you would want to sieve a lot more, but just for time's sake, I'm not that worried about it. I'm just going to fill this up with more Petrobond. Pack it in with the sand rammer. Maybe I'll make this my next video, is how to make this sand rammer. Seriously, go check out Paul's Garage video if you want to make one of these yourself, because that also has the STL file for the 3D printer that he used to make this. It's really handy. I used to just use a little 2x4 block and then a mallet, and I would pack sand that way. Man, that was a hassle. But just gonna keep packing, make sure it's nice and good. Nice and simple there. Going to cut off the excess. Scoop that into the bucket. Alright, sorry, we just took a short water break and got a fan because it's really hot out here. We're gonna take this off, take this apart. Be careful and lift straight up when removing the piece. Alright, and then I'm not gonna use my hands to remove it from there. I'm gonna find a pair of pliers and use those.
Is it recording? Yeah.
So then I'm just going to lightly grab around the model if I can. And then pull out, straight out, so that way you don't disturb the sand. Alright, and then there we go. Now all I have to do is get all the crumbs out. And then now I get to put in the pour hole. So when working with aluminum, it tends to shrink. A key example of it is this rammer right here. It shrunk in as it was cooling down because it's more dense as a solid and less dense as a liquid. So as it's cooling, it shrinks up. So what we can do is put a feeder on top of that, making it to where there's still liquid molten metal coming in above it, so that way as it cools in here, it can just pull from the molten metal and keep filling that hole. That's what I should have done here, and it's what I'll do in the next video whenever I make another one of these. So in order to do that, all you have to do is just put a feeder above it and make that one of your portholes. So aluminum is notorious for this. A lot of metals do it to some degree, but aluminum is one of the worst ones. Or at least it's the most common culprit of it. So all I'm going to do is just take this and then press it down in there, cutting out a hole in the sand for me to pour through. You want to do it going through the model because sometimes as you pull this out, it does that and it'll break away the sand. And if you notice, there's still only just that hole where I put that in the model. If I had broken away anything around there, it would have lost a lot of detail, and that would lead to hours more of cleanup. And metal casters don't like cleanup. Alright, so I've got the pour hole set. I'm pressing down around so that way I have kind of like a miniature funnel for it. I'm gonna go turn on the air compressor so that way I can blow away any excess air. And then I'm gonna light the forge and get the metal going. Alright, go ahead and pause it. Alright, so I've got this extension cord, just gonna plug it into the air compressor here. It's about to get kind of loud, but with this blowing nozzle, I'm gonna blow out all of the excess sand so that way it doesn't get knocked out whenever I go to do the pour. That can lead to a lack of detail and extreme flashing. So proper air compressor safety, always make sure that it's bled whenever you're not using it, so that way condensation doesn't happen, which can rust the inside walls and cause this thing to explode under pressure. So you want to bleed it, letting the air go through whenever you're not in use, and then just tighten it whenever you need it. So I'm going to turn this thing on.
Go.
Just going to let it build up a little bit of air before I use it. And then just blow away the excess sand. This one's good. And now that one's good. So as I mentioned before, turn off the air compressor and you want to bleed out the air. So that way it doesn't rust the inside wall. I'm going to put this half back on top. Oh, actually, there's a little bit of an overhang in the pour hole I want to take care of. As I would pour metal through, that would catch that. Just shake it, because I already hit it with the air compressor. I'm not worried about too much excess sand. Going to put this back on here. I'm going to move it over to the work table over on this corner. You can see there's some burn holes from previous failed attempts at other projects I attempted to cast. I'm going to clamp this down, same corners as before. Alright, so the sand is good to go. Now we get to lighting the forge. Alright, so I'm tightening in the nozzle. got the crucible inside. It's already tempered. Definitely before using a clay graphite crucible, temper it. There's plenty of videos on YouTube on how to do that. I'm gonna get some ingots real quick and put that inside so I can do the cast. Just gonna use this old sprue and then this little ingot. I mainly get my aluminum from soda cans, and then I put a little bit of copper in there to make it easier to pour. I'd like to say I take no liability for anyone repeating the actions that I'm doing in this video, and please don't do any of this without safety precautions. So for instance, I'm going to be using this face shield, and in case anything goes wrong, I'm gonna have a bucket of water on standby. All right. Unless you have experience with metal casting, I would not do this unless you have someone who has experienced metal casting nearby, because this can get very dangerous very quickly, especially in the hands of someone unexperienced. With that out of the way, I'm gonna light the forge. Alright, so I'm gonna use a blowtorch to have a constant flame. Nothing too crazy. I used to use matches, but that left a lot of ash. I'm gonna have it just right over here, and then I'm going to lightly increase the level of propane. Then you just turn off the blowtorch, and then whenever you think it's good, you go ahead and close the lid. Alright, I've got these blacksmith tongs which I'm going to be using to pour the aluminum. I recommend using a lifter and crucible tongs if you're using anything heavier than aluminum, or if you've got a big crucible. I have another forge which has a bigger crucible in it, and I use aluminum bronze in that one. And so for that I made a lifter and crucible tongs for that. But for this, since it's such lightweight, I can just use the blacksmith tongs that came with the forge. When working with it, I recommend using welder gloves, just because they're meant for the high heat. So I've got a pair right here that I'm gonna put on, and then the secret to the forge is just kind of watch it to make sure that it gets proper airflow and a good vortex, because you want the fire to be going around the crucible, so that way it keeps the heat going and translates into all around the crucible very well. So now I'm just going to kind of watch it. Whenever I think it's preheated and it's got all the moisture out, I'm gonna crank it up, and then I'll come back to whenever the metal's molten. Alright, gonna crank it up. Alright, I'll be back whenever it's molten. Alright, so we're back and the metal's molten. In there. So what I'm going to do is lower the heat. I'm going to pull the crucible out and then skim the excess impurities off of the top. To this old muffin tray that definitely isn't making muffins anymore. Normally I would use table salt to get the rest, but I'm really not that worried about it. I'm gonna set that back in there. I'm gonna turn back up the heat, and I'm also going to preheat this ingot mold here, so that way if there's any excess metal, I can pour it in here safely and make an ingot for next time. So I'm gonna turn this up, wait a little bit, and then I'll be back. Alright, so it should be about good. I'm gonna remove this, set it down off here to the side, flip this up. I'm gonna turn off the forge, remove this out so that way the heat doesn't transfer back up and cause any damage to it. Since it's lightweight, like I said, I'm able to just grab it with these tongs and do a real quick pour. Once you start, you don't want to stop and let air through. Alright, so now that that's full, I'm going to come down here, pour the excess into the ingot mold. Alright, so that should be good. Now I'm just going to set this crucible back inside, let everything cool off, and start cleaning up. I'll be back once everything's cooled off, and then I'll show you the final product. Alright, so I cleaned up a little bit. That's solid. So I'm just going to take off the clamps, which I wish I had metal ones, but these are just plastic. So you don't want to touch anything hot to them. Always want to step back when you open this up because it's gonna smoke like that. Gonna break it off in here. Grab out the model. And this is a dual purpose for that bucket of water from earlier. Step back. You can use it to cool off the metal. It's still going to be a little bit hot to the touch, but it at least brings it down to at least 100 degrees Celsius. And you can do the same thing with the ingot. Oh, there we go. Saying be careful touching it to the plastic, because even though it's cooled off, it can still melt the bucket. Alright, I'm gonna knock this sand out into here some more. This black sand generally isn't, like this burnt black sand generally isn't that good for recasting, but it makes for some good filler, and in the future I plan on re-oiling it with thread cutting oil. There was another guy on YouTube who actually found that it was thread cutting oil. I would go check him out. Give him some appreciation, because I haven't found anybody else be able to diagnose what oil actually revives it except for him. So I'm gonna close that up. That's good to go. Clean up a little bit. Right, so then we walked away with a decent ingot. Doesn't look pretty, doesn't have to, not worried about it. This, however, that's got a lot of detail in there. We can see some flashing lines around here. These little stubbles are from the hook part, the keychain part, which actually broke off. We've got some more flashing in between the legs, which I might be able to clean some of that out real quick. Yeah, so we got a little bit of flashing in there. Flashing is just when like where the two flasks meet up, there's separation just a little bit for metal to flow through, or there's inconsistencies in the sand. And so little bits of metal get out on the outside, and it's easy to just grind away when cleaning up. But other than that, you have this sprue, which you can cut off with like an angle grinder, or if you have some sort of metal cutting saw. I don't. And then you can just clean this up with like a wire brush or something like that. But other than that, that's how you cast something. If you like the video, go ahead and leave a like. If you want to see more, go ahead and subscribe. Really, it's up to you. So yeah, if you like it, go ahead and just leave a little bit of appreciation. Otherwise, have a good day.